right, everybody, welcome back to On the Ball, the video podcast series from the Vanderbilt Sports and Society Initiative. My name is Andrew Maraniss, and I am really thrilled to have Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum, as our guest today. Bob, I was just telling you before I hit record that I told a friend of mine, Ricky Thrash here at Vandy, that I was going to be talking to you, and I've never seen him so happy. He's a big fan of yours and your own podcast, the Black Diamonds podcast. So a little bit of pressure on me to deliver for Ricky today.
Well, I appreciate you, Ricky, man. Thanks for being so supportive. And I look forward to hopefully welcoming both of you guys, you back to Kansas City and Ricky over to Kansas City to experience the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Oh, I'll look forward to that. I've had a chance to come by there two or three times now. I know that many of our Vanderbilt athletics teams have
Yes.
visited the museum in the past. I've seen pictures of our baseball team going through the museum. It's a terrific place. I want to talk to you about the history of the museum and what's in store. I know you have big things in store for the museum too. Um, but for those who don't know, Mr. Kendrick has been with the museum going back to the late 90s, I believe, when you started as the marketing director there, became president. You're now a member of the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. uh, a lot of people know you from your Black Diamonds podcast and hearing great stories about Negro League players. And so this is a thrill to talk to you. Um, One question I had for you, you do such a great job of illuminating the stories of other people, but I want to hear a little bit more about you, and your childhood, like with sports and baseball specifically. I know you played college basketball, but like, what was the role of sports in your life as a kid growing up?
Well, sports played a pivotal role in my life, even though I grew up in a very small rural community in Georgia, a little town called Crawfordville, Georgia. It is east of Atlanta, west of Augusta, Andrew, all of 500 people.
Oh,
But
wow.
sports was always something that was at the forefront. I grew up in a sports family. I'm the youngest of six boys. They all were athletes. My father was a huge sports fan. And so access to sports was something that was always there for me. And I naturally gravitated to it. And I think anything that your brothers do, you want to do it. You want to try and do it better than they did. Now, my town was too small to field a high school baseball team. But when I was a kid, my older brothers, they played hardball. They would actually have these games on Sunday afternoon where they would play the local town. They played a town team would come in and play them at the park, and people would actually gather around. They'd sit there on the hood of their cars, and they'd have the picnic baskets and the whole 9 yards to watch them play. And so baseball has always been something that I've been a fan as long as I can remember. I think I was maybe 5, 6 years old when I taught myself how to read a box score out of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Okay.
And of course, a lifelong Braves fan. And Henry Aaron is my all-time favorite baseball player and my childhood idol as a kid growing up in Crawfordville, Georgia. But oddly enough, my first baseball game was at Old Memorial Stadium in Baltimore, Maryland. My brother
Okay.
took me to see a baseball game. He lived there in the DC area, and he took me there to see a baseball game. But baseball has always been important to me. I never dreamt that I would be ultimately making my living in baseball, albeit baseball history.
No kidding. Wow. So as a kid growing up in rural Georgia, Hank Aaron, your favorite player, how old were you when he, broke the home run record in 74? And what memories do you have of that moment?
Oh man, one of my favorite memories because I was almost 12 years old when he hit home run 715 in Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium 51 years ago. And when he hit home run 715 there in Atlanta's Fulton County Stadium, I'm at home in my mother's living room in Crawfordville, Georgia. And as he's circling the bases there, I'm circling the bases in my mother's living room. She had an old couch that was first base. The old TV was second base. The other old couch was third base, and her recliner was home plate. And as my childhood idol was touching them all, I'm touching them all too. And in 1999, I get the opportunity to take him on a tour of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And as I oftentimes share this story, it really was the first time that I was ever starstruck. Now,
Okay.
mind you, we've had two American presidents tour this museum. President Bill Clinton, President George W. Bush, First Lady Laura Bush, First Lady Michelle Obama, the late great General Colin Powell, former Vice President Al Gore, Maya Angelou, Nikki Giovanni, a list of athletes and other entertainers. And as I oftentimes say, with no disrespect to any of them, they are not Henry Aaron in the eyes, mind, and heart of this kid from Crawfordville, Georgia. And so I get to take him on a tour of the museum, and it was just absolutely amazing. We get to an area that is dedicated to the clown teams of the Negro Leagues. And of course, for those who are listening who may not know, Henry Aaron's illustrious professional baseball career began in the Negro Leagues with the Indianapolis Clowns in 1952, which at that time he was a skinny, cross-handed hitting shortstop. So in the case of Mr. Aaron, he was a right-hand hitter who was hitting with his left hand on top. That is unorthodox. The fear is that you break your wrist hitting in that manner. Now, Henry Aaron, y'all, is knocking the cover off the baseball in a highly unorthodox fashion. When he gets to the Clowns, they put the right hand on top, and the rest, as they say, is history. So there's this wonderful photograph, and you can find it online, where he's standing at the train station in Mobile, Alabama. The year is 1952. He's about to board the train to go leave to join the Indianapolis Clowns. And right by his foot is a small cardboard duffel bag. And when we get to that photograph, which he had seen before, but it had been a long time, he looks at me, he says, Bob, I may have had two changes of clothes in that bag, $1.50 in my pocket, and a ham sandwich that my mama had made me going to go chase that dream. It worked out pretty well for the Hammer. And without question, that was one of the greatest days in baseball for me because after we finished the tour, we go over right across the street from the museum to the Gym Theater, which back in the day was a movie house. It was restored, converted into a performance venue, and we have a fireside chat with Mr. Aaron. You know, sad to say, Andrew, it took him 25 years at that point in time for him to finally be able to exhale and celebrate what many thought to be the greatest sports accomplishment of all time because of the hate and vitriol that he received in as he was, chasing that record, and the fact that people did not want to see Ruth's record broken, particularly by a black man in the Deep South. And he shared that incredible story, over 1 million pieces of hate mail that he received during that chase of Ruth's record, death threats, didn't know if he was going to make it around the bases. Yeah, and
Yep.
fortunately,
And
no
those
no
kids run down the
incident.
field. It was
Exactly.
pretty scary.
It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
It was. I think we all took a collective gas. They were on the field to celebrate. Yeah, they weren't trying to harm Mr. Aaron. They were on the field to celebrate. But there were snipers in the ballpark that night because of the death threats. And his own personal bodyguard carried a binocular case over his neck. And he when those kids ran onto the field, he had started to open the binocular case because he had a 38 snub-nosed pistol in that case. He
Wow.
started to open the case, and fortunately, cooler heads prevailed because what was one of the most memorable sports accomplishment, the most in my lifetime, could have turned into one of the most tragic if somebody had shot those kids. Or someone would have gotten shot in a situation like that, and heaven forbid. And thankfully, nothing happened, and they were able to celebrate that milestone. And his memories of that were just so etched. But we finished the conversation, and then we go up to the mezzanine level of the gym theater. He, myself, his wife Billy, and a few other folks, and I get to sit down over a platter of Gates barbecue ribs with my childhood idol. It don't get any better than that.
I can't imagine it getting any better than that. Well, I'm happy for you. You got to experience that. Unbelievable. When you were growing up, did you hear any stories from your parents, grandparents, older relatives about the Negro Leagues? Like, what was your comprehension of Negro League baseball as a kid?
Well, like most, I think I knew the names Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, Josh Gibson. Those are transcending kinds of names. And I think most of us as baseball fans have likely heard those names. My brother was a huge Joe Black fan.
Okay.
Uh-huh. But I never knew of Joe Black having played in the Negro Leagues until really I got involved with the Negro Leagues Museum. My memory of Joe Black was as a Dodger.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. But then, and in fact, that he was such a huge fan of Joe Black. And of course, Joe Black was also, after his baseball career, wrote a column for both Ebony and Jet called By the Way with Joe Black. And for those of you who are hearing that name for the first time, Joe Black would go on to become the first African American executive of a major transportation company, Greyhound. And so he was very prolific in both his baseball career as well as what he would accomplish after his baseball career. So I didn't hear a lot about the Negro Leagues beyond what I already knew about those transcending names, again, like Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, the lore and legend that surrounded those kinds of almost mythical like athletes. It was only until I started volunteering for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in 1993 did I finally get an understanding of just how profound this story really was. And
Mhm.
it blew me away.
Unbelievable. In my own life, I think I've known three former Negro League players. So I was really excited when I came by the museum. You know, you can enter names and see the histories of players. So Ed Martin was the first person that I met. He became a basketball coach at Tennessee State University, and then he was an assistant coach here at Vanderbilt when I was a student. And he pitched for the Philadelphia Stars, and he would tell me stories about that. Then there was a man who lived here in Nashville for many years named Butch McCord,
Hmm.
and he was another great storyteller. I love to sit with him. And then I was very fortunate. I worked for the Tampa Bay Rays for their first season, 98 season. And during spring training, we were playing the Reds in Sarasota, and Buck O'Neill was there. And
Yes.
I had a chance to meet Mr. O'Neill and have lunch with him. And then he came to a Rays game later in the year, and we ate lunch together again. And just to have those firsthand experiences and not just read about or see a documentary, but hear stories direct from the source was unbelievable. And I know that that has to be, and the opportunities are fewer and fewer, but like to have these, a chance to really talk to the guys. And I'm
Yes.
wondering, like, what have been, other than like Hank Aaron, some other memorable experiences you've had hearing the
Oh,
stories from the guys that were there, and
well,
particularly Buck O'Neill, who's so important there in Kansas
yeah.
City.
Well, I got the absolute joy to hang out with Buck O'Neill for so many years because he was right here at the museum. He was the chairman of the board of the museum. And he and I spent countless hours together, whether it was here trying to fundraise to raise money for the museum or if we were traveling. And so there were car rides and plane rides and breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I got to hear these stories. And I tell people all the time the smartest thing that I ever did was I kept my mouth closed and I listened because
Yes.
there was so much wisdom that he had that could be imparted if you wanted. He didn't force it on you, but it was there for you. And I draw from those experiences all the time. I tell people they think I'm joking. I talk to Buck almost every single day. Now, Andrew, he doesn't always talk back to me. But I talk to Buck almost every day. And certainly there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about my friend Buck O'Neill, but I also got to know the great Monty Irvin. And if you knew Monty Irvin and Buck O'Neill, you knew two of the finest human beings to ever walk the face of this earth who just happened to be great baseball players. I mean, just the humanly qualities that they possessed was just special. But you know what? I saw that and I witnessed that with all of the players that I've ever met. And really, the thing that captivated me as I started to learn about the Negro Leagues in 1993, when I started volunteering here at the museum, it was their spirits. Their spirits were so endearing
Mhm.
because I think that everyone listening to this show would likely agree that had they been bitter, about the things that transpired in their lives as they were trying to play baseball in this country, every one of us would have said, you had every right to be bitter. But to a player that I ever met, not one of them harbored any bitterness or expressed any ill will toward anyone who may have attempted to perpetrate something against them as they were traveling the highways and byways of this country just to play baseball. As you can imagine this, it wasn't uncommon that they could ride into a town, fill up the ballpark, but yet not be able to get a meal from the same fans, y'all, that had just cheered them, or
Hmm.
not have a place to stay. So, yes, they would sleep on the bus and eat their peanut butter and crackers. But what you have to admire about this story is they never allowed that set of social circumstances to kill their love of the game. Their spirits were such that, okay, if I've got to sleep on the bus and if I've got to eat my peanut butter and crackers, I'm going to keep playing ball. And really, that's the spirit that you feel at this museum. Our story is not a woe is mine kind of story. These athletes never cried about the social injustice. They went out and did something about it. You won't let me play with you in the major leagues, then I will create a league of my own. And as I remind my guests, when you stop to think about that, that is the American way. And so while America was trying to prevent them from sharing in the joys of its so called national pastime, it was the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. And again, what's not to love about those kinds of stories? It's so triumphant in nature, and that's the spirit that they carried. They didn't like the things that happened to them, but they weren't ever going to cry about it, and they never allowed it to harden their hearts. You know, and the thing that Buck O'Neill would oftentimes say is that hate eats you up on the inside. It takes a lot of energy to hate another human being. And I don't know if sometimes we realize just how much energy it requires. It's much easier to love than it is to hate.
Well, it's an important message that this museum conveys at this time in history, absolutely, more than ever. Um, and having been there, it's just such an educational and fun experience, really, to see this history come alive. And so I wondered if you could educate us on from the beginnings of this museum, which was very, very small, right, to the present day location you
Yes.
have, and then what I've been reading about what's on the horizon for you coming soon in Kansas City.
It's been an amazing journey for a little museum, Andrew, that no one gave any chance of succeeding. And I could understand why, folks, because we were building it in an area that had been essentially left abandoned. Historic 18th and Vine, which in its heyday was as recognized street cross section as there was anywhere in the world, because you had that intrinsic mixture of jazz and baseball radiating from this one street corner. Oh, the place was jumping. But like a lot of urban areas, it had died. And sadly, the city had turned its back on what you could make a legitimate argument is the city's most authentic historical experience, that being 18th and Vine. Everything that Kansas City hangs its hat on, barbecue and jazz,
Mhm.
both originated from this area, 18th and Vine, which coincidentally is the exact same area that the Negro Leagues were established in 1920, right around the corner from where we operate now. And so in 1990, the late great Buck O'Neill, another wonderful human being. He was then the head of the Black Archives of Mid America. The late, great Horace Peterson had the brainchild of doing what Horace wanted to do initially was a Negro Leagues Hall of Fame. And Buck said, no, Horace, we don't need a Negro Leagues Horace Hall of Fame. He says the players who deserve to be, who are good enough, should be recognized in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. You already got a Baseball Hall of Fame. We don't need another. And so Horace's response was, well, Buck, what would you suggest? Buck said a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, that it was far more important for us to preserve, celebrate, and educate the public about this piece of history than it was to create a pseudo Hall of Fame when you already know you have a finite number of people that you can induct into your Hall of Fame. And that led us down the path. At that time, we were in a little tiny one room office, not the size of my office that we're recording this in, and guys like Buck O'Neill and other local Negro Leaguers who were still with us at that time, sadly to say, every one of them that were here in Kansas City, they've passed on now. But then they literally took turns paying the monthly rent to keep that little office open. And as I like to say, with it, our hopes and dreams of one day building a facility that would not only pay tribute to one of the greatest chapters in baseball history, but what now thousands upon thousands each and every year discover one of the greatest chapters in American history. And again, that's the rich, compelling, inspirational story of the Negro Leagues. In 1997, we moved into our current home. So we went from a one room office to today is about 10,000 square feet of exhibit space that chronicles the story. So it's not an overwhelmingly large footprint, but as I remind my guests, within that footprint is a lot of information. And of course, along that journey, we today are recognized as America's national Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, as deemed and designated so by the United States Congress. And of course, here recently we announced plans to build a brand new 30 plus thousand square foot Negro Leagues Baseball Museum as the crown jewel here at historic 18th and Vine, creating what I call the nation's first Negro Leagues campus. So this new museum will be affixed to the historic Paseo YMCA, where the Negro Leagues were established. We're renovating that building as we speak. And then the new facility will be anchored against that, and thusly creating what I also refer to as an international headquarters for both Black baseball and social history as the gateway into historic 18th and Vine. That's a long way from that one room office, man. Now we got
Uh,
a lot of work to do because we've got to raise some 30 plus $1 million to make this dream of ours come true. But I have no doubt it'll be challenging, but I have no doubt that we'll get it done.
oh, that's amazing. I mean, and one of the things I admire about you is not only can people come to Kansas City to the museum, but you also take the story to the people where they are, and I think about my son who's 11 years old and can't wait for his next edition of MLB The Show to arrive. I think it comes out in 2 days as we tape this. And there's storytelling, and you can play as Negro League players in MLB The Show. How did that idea come about? And tell us more about how that all came together.
Well, I'm sure 20 years from now, I'll lie and swear it was my idea. But but it really wasn't my idea. My dear friend, he's like family now, Ramon Russell over at San Diego Studios and some of the other folks there at Sony San Diego Studios reached out to me about the possibility of seeing if there was a way to get the Negro Leagues into the video game MLB The Show. And I think they wanted to temper and manage my expectations. And so this was just strictly exploratory. But what we found so interesting, the more stories I told, the more interested they became. And the next thing I know, y'all, there was a full-fledged production crew here at the museum. They sat me down and had me start telling stories that became content for the Negro Leagues inclusion in the video game MLB Show, a mode that is called Storylines. And it
Yes.
has become one of the most popular features of MLB The Show, the biggest baseball video game in the world. And it has by far been one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing, that this museum has ever done because you prefaced it. We're talking about millions upon millions of young people and young adults who now are learning about the Negro Leagues, but not only are they learning about the Negro Leagues, they are falling in love with the Negro Leagues. But what's not to love about the swagger of Satchel Paige, the speed of Cool Papa Bell, the mythical like power of Josh Gibson? I've oftentimes said if anyone deserved to be in a video game, it would be the players from the Negro Leagues because they played the game, I guess you could say, video game-esque anyway.
Right.
The style and flair that they brought to the game, and I have been just overwhelmed by the success of this project and all the kids who are coming to the museum because they saw the museum in the video game. And Andrew, they want to meet the guy that's telling the stories
All
in the
right.
video game,
Yeah.
me. Now, y'all, I'll be honest. I saw myself doing a lot of things. I never dreamt that I would be in a video game. And kudos to Sony and San Diego Studios because they could have just thrown the players in the video game with statistical data, but no context.
Right.
And I don't think it would have been nearly as effective as it has proven to be because they wanted to have these stories associated with the players. So you learn. And we've won multiple history awards for how we're using a video game to teach history. And I've had any number of educators who've reached out to me and say they are now incorporating it into the classroom as a perfect entree into teaching history because you're creating an experience. And
Yes.
I've always believed that experiential learning is the most impactful, effective way to learn. Now, our teachers today have to teach so that kids can pass standardized testing. And I get it because that's where the funding is
Mhm.
associated. I'm going to do just enough, hopefully, to pass that test. Man, the minute that test is over with, it is forgotten. But
Right.
if you create an experience, you retain that. And that's what we've seen happen. And I think it was so incumbent upon any museum, but particularly a history museum, and even more so a cultural museum, is that we have to establish relevancy. Yeah, Negro Leagues baseball, man, hadn't been played in over 6 decades. So how do you make this connect with this generation? And as I've oftentimes said, how do you bring the Negro Leagues to life? You put them in a video game. And the connection has been amazing. And we have a 5 year partnership. So the new game that you just referenced is the third year of a 5 year partnership. And I'm back in the video game telling more stories, introducing more players, and like I said, it has been absolutely amazing. And it has turned me into a household name within the gaming community.
What a thrill. I mean, and you're so right. It's a brilliant way to teach kids. Oftentimes, kids think history might be boring or something, but this is
Exactly.
the
Well,
furthest thing
I
from
was
boring.
that kid. I was the kid that thought history was boring. People ask me, they tell me all the time, say, "Oh, you one of the great historians." I said, my history teacher would roll over in his grave for somebody calling saying, "This kid here, he teaching somebody history." Oh no.
Well, I wondered if you could teach us a little bit of our own history here in Nashville. I think one of the players that's featured this year is Turkey Stearns from here in Nashville, and people love to hear you tell a story. Like, what can you tell us about this man named Turkey Stearns?
Well, he's a name that many don't know, but you should know because he's one of the greatest baseball players of all time, a five-tool guy who was born there in Nashville, would later go on to play for a number of teams, but primarily the great Detroit Stars. He earned his nickname Turkey. Well, he had a very pigeon-toed stance at home plate. And I think guys saw the pitchers would see the way he stood at home plate, Andrew, and I think they thought he was going to be easy to get out. Oh, he had him right where he wanted him. He lit him up. And when he ran, his arms flapped like a turkey. Yeah, it literally flapped like a turkey. But as I tell people all the time, this turkey could fly. Yeah, no, he could run it down with the best of them in the outfield. He was a five-tool superstar in the Negro Leagues. And when you hear the likes of someone the magnitude of James Thomas Cool Papa Bell say, if Turkey Stearns is not in the Hall of Fame, then no one should be in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. That is saying something. And of course, he is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. That's one of the names, a lesser known name, if you could consider someone who's in the Hall of Fame as lesser known, but he is one of the lesser known superstars of the Negro Leagues. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce him. And everything that Turkey could do on the field was phenomenal. One of the great power hitters of the Negro Leagues, but he also hit for average as well, and great throwing arm and blazing speed for a guy who looked so awkward the way that he ran.
That's great. I didn't know how he got that nickname. Um, While we're talking about connections between Nashville and the Negro Leagues, there's a present day connection or effort with Music City Baseball to bring a major league team here and to honor the Negro League tradition by calling the team the Stars after a Negro League team that was here in Nashville back in the day. What is this association between your museum and this effort to bring a team to Nashville mean to you? Why are you
it,
interested in being part of that?
it means a lot. And again, it's another idea that when it happens, I'm gonna take credit for it. And I ain't have nothing to do with the idea. This is the vision of my dear friend John Lord. And when he reached out to me about the Nashville Stars and very brief history there in Nashville, but important history because it makes that connection to the heritage of our game there in the great city of Nashville. And when we're successful in bringing an expansion major league team to Nashville and have it named the Nashville Stars, this will be game changing because it would be the first time ever that a major league team carried the name of a Negro League team and what that would mean in terms of the elevation of the awareness of the Negro Leagues. And this museum would be monumental. And so we are super excited about this venture that we've embarked on. And I'm thrilled to have an association with this and serve on the board there at Music City as we continue to try and create a pathway to bring expansion Major League Baseball to the great city of Nashville. There's no doubt about it. Nashville is primed and ready. And we feel like we are ahead of the game. And so there's still a lot of work left to be done. And eventually, baseball will get to a place where it will officially announce expansion and what's going to be required to do this. And we want to make sure that we are ready and to see the interest already in just the merchandising that
Mhm.
is part of a team that even doesn't exist in a major league capacity. But people are excited about the merchandise that has been launched in and around the team, the history that the team represents. And so John and his team have done an amazing job of kind of priming everyone for how significant this would be, not just the aspect of bringing a Major League Baseball team to Nashville, but combining the rich history of the Negro Leagues with this potential Major League team when it comes to Nashville makes it, in my mind, even more significant.
Speaking of that merchandise, I saw the hats that they had out last week, and I think there was a prize that you had signed one of them. I'm sure all the video gamers were like really excited to have
Yeah,
the
no,
chance
I'm
to.
still I'm still blown away by how many people were trying to win that hat with my signature on it. I don't know why, but I'm glad they are. And the new era cap that we released as an official cap was really, really cool. I think we sold out, and so now they're being reordered because the demand, I think, exceeded what we even thought it would be, which is very exciting because a portion of the proceeds raised from the sale of those hats come back to support the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Yeah, fantastic. A couple more questions. I know you've got a busy day. Another way that you stay connected to more modern baseball is through the Hall of Game that you have, where you're honoring Black Major League players who maybe have some of the same spirit as some of these guys you've been talking about that played in the Negro Leagues. For those who aren't familiar with that, like what is this Hall of Game program and what are you trying to accomplish with it?
Well, it was an idea that I had several years ago that it would be special and a way to honor the Negro Leagues by honoring former major leaguers who we believe played the game the way that they played it in the Negro Leagues. So you played it with passion, you played it with high skill, but you also played it with a little swag, as the kids would say, because you had to have that if you were going to play in the Negro Leagues. And I remember my good friend Dave Winfield saying one of the greatest compliments he ever received was while sitting down talking to a bunch of former Negro League players. They looked at him and said, "You know what? You were good enough. You could have played with us." And
Uh,
he took that for just what it was, a tremendous compliment. And we want people to understand the level of play that was there in the Negro Leagues. And by honoring some of Major League's very best, who exemplify, again, the spirit and style of the Negro Leagues, is what the Hall of Game is all about. The next induction of the Hall of Game will take place on September 27th here in Kansas City. So we should have an announcement of the new class of 2025 coming up here pretty soon in preparation for that event.
oh, great. I'll be looking forward to that announcement. Um, I have to ask before we go, right now you see stories about museums and websites having to take information down, cemeteries at Arlington National not having stories about Black veterans anymore. I mean, has this I know you're not a government institution, but like the state of the world right now, how has it affected the museum, if at all? And what does it mean to you to be able to continue to tell these types of stories when other culture institutions are, pulling back?
I think it, in many ways, quantifies why this museum is so special. And I think it makes it even more important because we don't know ultimately how these legislative measures are going to impact schools and their abilities to teach this history. It is important that we continue to find ways, as we've done through the video games, to make sure that this history can get in front of our children so that they can understand the significance of the Negro Leagues and why it is so important. So I keep a watchful eye on all of these things. To this point, they haven't really impacted us because, and I don't shy away, Andrew, from the fact that at the crux of our story, it is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You
Right.
know, I tell people all the time when Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier in 1947, and then the doors open for other black and brown athletes to move into Major League Baseball. What happened? Major League Baseball got better. And I know that it's an oversimplistic way to look at this, but the fact that the Negro Leagues opened its doors to any and everybody who could play. There was nothing discriminatory in their mindset. So you had white players, you had Hispanic players, you had Asian players. All they cared was, can you play? And if you can play, you can play. There were women who played. There were women who were executives and owners of Negro League teams. And so to me, it exemplifies what we should be. And I know that there's fear around the word of DE and I, and I don't quite understand why that is, but that's the narrative, and we understand that and we realize that, but we don't shy away from who we are as an institution. And as I'm seeing crowds get bigger and bigger here at the museum, I think people are also embracing what this museum is all about.
Absolutely. And it's such an important cultural institution in this country. I'm really excited to hear that it's growing. You've got this fundraising effort. So that'll be my last question. People listening to this, maybe they're part of a company that might want to sponsor part of this growth of the museum, or
Please,
they're just
we,
an
we can use all
individual.
the help we can get.
Yeah. What do if somebody's interested in learning more about your plans and maybe like making a contribution somehow, like how do they do it?
Yeah, no, the campaign is called Pitch for the Future to build a new Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. You can learn more about the museum and the campaign online at www.nlbm.com. And so, yeah, I hope that people will go online, consider supporting this effort to grow and build a new Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. It's such an important story. And please understand, there is no donation that is insignificant. Every little bit helps, or as I like to say, every buck counts.
All right. In honor of Buck O'Neill. And Bob, there's so much more I could ask you, but I know you've got a full day. And if people want to hear your stories about some of these players, I highly recommend they listen to your Black Diamonds podcast or play MLB The Show. There's a lot of ways to learn this history. But Bob, thank you so much for taking the time. I'll look forward to seeing you in Kansas City, or if you're here in Nashville, please let me know. And I know my buddy Ricky would love to meet you as well. So have a
Well,
great day.
I certainly look forward to getting back to Nashville. I always enjoy my time there. Thanks so much for having me on the show. And again, if those listening, if your travels bring you to Kansas City, come by and see old Bob.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you so much.